Today's psalm was written in the aftermath of Israel coming back from exile, and it's one of a number of psalms that starts with these familiar words: Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, his love endures forever. And the particular reason for the psalmist's thankfulness comes in verses 2 to 3. He writes, Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story, those he redeemed from the hand of the foe, those he gathered from the lands, from east and west, from north and south. The psalmist calls on those who've been brought back from exile to tell the stories of how the Lord redeemed them. And that's what we get in the first half of the psalm, which we're focusing on this week. There are 4 pictures of what life was like for Israel in exile, 4 expressions of their cries to God for help, 4 descriptions of what it was like when he brought them home to the land. And later on in the Bible, in the New Testament, Peter describes Christians as strangers and exiles in this world, travelling home to heaven. He says this world is not our home, that we shouldn't be surprised if there are times when we feel out of place, or if there are times when we find ourselves longing for more than this world has to offer. And so as we look at these 4 pictures, bits of them will resonate with our experience here on earth, with the frustrations and the shortcomings. And other bits of them will be a foretaste of heaven, a glimpse of what it will feel like when we're finally home. Well, hopefully that's whet your appetite. We're going to dive in and have a look at the first picture. And it comes in verses 4 to 9, where being exiled is likened to being lost in a desert wasteland. A place where there's nowhere to settle, nowhere that feels like home. A place where there's not even anywhere to get food or drink. In exile, longings are unfulfilled, lives ebb away. But it's not all bleak, because the unfailing love of the Lord leads his people home to where they will be satisfied and full. The second picture comes in verses 10 to 16, and here the exile is compared to that horrible feeling of being trapped, stumbling around in a world of darkness, disoriented, enslaved to forces that cannot be escaped. And it was like that until the unfailing love of the Lord came and set them free, no longer trapped, but living in the light. Our third picture comes in verses 17 to 22. And if this were written today, it would describe the exile as a metaphorical hospital ward, where everyone is sick and no one has any real prospect of getting better. Here the people are weak, they have no appetites, they're losing the will to live. And at that moment, the unfailing love of the Lord means he speaks a healing word that rescues his people from the grave. Our fourth picture of the exile in verses 23 to 32 is filled with fear. And that fear comes from the sea, which for the Israelites was a particularly terrifying place. And so in these verses, they're pictured as being tossed around by the wild waves of chaos. They're nearly engulfed by the terrifying waters of the deep. And out of this place of fear, well, it's only the unfailing love of the Lord that can still the storm and bring them back to safety. This psalm, it's a wonderful psalm for those times when we feel unsatisfied in our wilderness world, when we feel as if the darkness of sin is getting the better of us, when we are overcome by our weakness in this world, fearful of the chaos that surrounds us. Because it reminds us that our God is a rescuing God, a God who will bring his people home from exile. And of course, we know more than the psalmist knew. We know that he's a God who sent his Son into the world to endure the agony of hunger in the wilderness, to go through the darkness of the cross, to suffer the afflictions that led to death, to face the destructive wave of the wrath of God. And we know that he did all that to take us home to the New Jerusalem, to a city where we will settle, a place where we will be free from sin forever, where we will enjoy renewed bodies that will never perish, and where there is no longer any sea, where chaos is behind us. And so as we look forward to heaven, let us do what the psalmist says. Let us give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds he's done for mankind.